Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking about Fatal Invitation Part 8. Today we're going to be talking about the tragic life of Shonda Shar. Before we continue with our video, I want to make a quick disclaimer right now that on today's video we will be discussing crimes involving assault, torture, and sexual assault involving minors. So viewer discretion is greatly advised. After the girls would get out from being lost a second time, it said that Lori Tackett would instruct Hope Rippey, as she was driving Lori's car, to go near her house in Madison, and Lori Tackett would actually take the girls to a more secluded spot. It said that Lori Tackett would direct Hope Rippey to going to an abandoned house in Madison near her home, and this abandoned building would be in a logging road. Lori Tackett would direct Hope Rippey to going to an abandoned house that was near her home in Madison, and this house would be on a logging road in a very densely forested area. And it is said that when they arrived at this building, that Hope Rippey and Tony Lawrence would be too quote-unquote frightened to go out with Melinda and Lori. Now I want to keep a little side note about right now. If you remember, Shonda Shar has been completely stripped down to her underwear. She has been tied from her hands and her feet. She is completely bound. She has no way of defending herself. She has nothing to protect herself. And I just want y'all to think about this for a second. And keep in mind, this is a 12-year-old child versus a 16 and 17-year-old. Keep that in mind. They would drag Shonda Shar out to the abandoned building, and it said here that Melinda Loveless, filled with rage, would begin very violently beating her in the face. It said at one point that Melinda would take Shonda's head and smash it over her knee, and the force of this impact would be so great that the braces in Shonda's mouth would actually cut the inside of her mouth. And once Melinda had enough of just beating Shonda Shar, who was defenseless and could not protect herself, she would take the knife that she had brought with her originally in the back of her pocket, and she would try to slice Shonda Shar's throat. But the knife would actually be too dull and didn't penetrate far enough to actually cut her throat. So Shonda would be left bleeding from her throat already, and Melinda Loveless and Lori Tackett would decide, well, let's take turns stabbing her. Now remember when I said Hope Rippey and Tony Lawrence were too quote-unquote frightened to go outside? Remember that? Magically, Tony Lawrence would all of a sudden not be afraid anymore, and would have enough bravery to get out of the car to hold down her feet, hold down Shonda Shar's feet, while these two girls stabbed her. Sorry, give me a minute. Now, while Tony Lawrence was holding down Shonda Shar's feet, as I said, Melinda Loveless and Lori Tackett would take turns stabbing the 12-year-old girl in her chest and in her legs. At which point they would both get that out of their system, and they would begin taking a rope. And once they had taken this rope, Melinda Loveless would take one end and Lori Tackett would take another, and they would wrap it around Shonda Shar's neck, and they would begin strangling her to the point that Shonda Shar would actually pass out and she would be unconscious. The girls would actually think this is actually what killed her, but unfortunately Shonda's treatment is far from over. And after Shonda would pass out unconscious, they would take her body and throw it into the trunk of the car. Hope Rippey would then drive the girls back to Lori Tackett's parents' house, where it said that the girls, and again, this just, I do not understand how these girls can go from this point to this point. I can't wrap my head around it. I can't. After they had done doing this to this 12-year-old girl, they would drive back to Lori Tackett's parents' house, where they would spend time lounging around and drinking soda. That is until they would actually start hearing Shonda Shar screaming in the trunk of the car. And at that point, Lori Tackett was way too afraid of getting caught, so she would take a pair of paring knives and she would walk out to the trunk of her car and she would begin stabbing Shonda Shar until she would be quiet. She would return a few moments later covered in blood and would say, "She's finally dead." At this point, the girls would all clean up the blood from the girl off of them. And they would spend the next couple hours telling each other's fortunes with rune stones until about 2:30 in the morning. Again, I cannot process this, that these girls can go from doing something as vile as this to doing normal slumber party stuff. I can't wrap my head around that. Around 2:30 in the morning, Hope Rippey and Tony Lawrence would be asked by Melinda Loveless if they wanted to join her going back road driving with Lori Tackett. And the girls would actually say that they were actually tired and they wanted to take a nap, but the girls were more than welcome to go driving around to where Melinda Loveless and Lori Tackett would get in her car and drive off. And it said that these two would take a nap. And here is the next side note. These two would be home alone with Lori Tackett's parents, who were asleep in the house at the time, for 4 hours. They had prime opportunity to do the right thing. Here, Jack. To inform Lori Tackett's parents what's going on. They had a phone at the house. They could have phoned somebody. And this is what really makes me angry. This is what really, really makes me so mad. These girls consider talking to boys and taking a nap more important than the safety of a 12-year-old girl. Ugh! Lori Tackett and Melinda Loveless would be driving down some back roads, more specifically in Canaan, Indiana, and they would start hearing crying and gurgling sounds coming from the trunk of the car. And surprisingly enough, Shonda Shar was still alive. She still had not been killed. She had survived the beatings. She had survived the stabbings. And she had survived the strangulation. And she was still holding on to life. But this wasn't good enough for Lori Tackett and Melinda Loveless. They would pull the car over to the side of the road, and Lori Tackett would take out a tire iron and would pop the trunk open. And as soon as they would pop the trunk open, it said that Shonda Shar would shoot right up, and her eyes would be rolled in the back of her head, and she would be completely covered in blood, not able to say anything, making gurgling sounds. And Lori Tackett would start savagely beating this girl over the head with his tire iron until what she says was more of a popping, crunching sound, and she could feel the head caving in to where Shonda would fall back into the trunk of the car. And Lori Tackett found this to be hilarious and would take the tire iron and hide it underneath Melinda Loveless's face and say, "Smell the blood."